You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 109, Speaking Armenian. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast and conversation with multilinguals. This week, we're talking about Armenian with Liana, a writer and journalist and creator of Dining in Diaspora, a book and multimedia project documenting the Armenian experience in America through food. In this conversation, Liana talks about immigrating to the U.S. from Iran as a child and settling into the vast Armenian community in Southern California. We talk about the Armenian language changes through the diaspora and the other languages that have influence on diaspora speakers all over the world. We talk about differences between the Western and Eastern Armenian dialects and efforts being made to revitalize Western Armenian. Liana talks about diversity within Armenian culture and the melodic cadence of the Iranian-Armenian dialect. She tells us about ways that the Armenian community have been able to remain connected to the culture, and because she writes about food, we also discuss some of her favorite dishes and Armenian contributions to American cuisine. Big thank you to Liana for this conversation and for sharing your language, heritage, and history of your community with all of us. If you enjoy episodes of Speaking Tongues, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, and like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. If you've been a longtime listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now pledge ongoing support for the show on buymeacoffee.com or on patreon.com. And as you know, I wrote a book, my food zine of international language and cuisine, Taste Buds Volume 1, is available now for purchase. Check social media for the sneak peek inside the book and make sure that you purchase one for yourself and one for your friends. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Liana. How are you today, Liana?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm so happy that we finally have this chance to talk, and I'm really excited to talk to you about all of your languages. I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
So my first language that I learned was Armenian, which is classified as an Indo-European language that belongs to an independent branch. I spoke it exclusively at home. I was born in Iran, and so we spoke Armenian at home. And my parents speak Farsi, Persian, but we left the country before I had a chance to learn it fully. We came to the U.S. as refugees in the late 80s, and so that's when, instead of being able to complement my Armenian with Persian, my Armenian was complemented with English. And so I learned how to speak English through, like most immigrant children do, through cartoons and TV shows and things like that. And along the way, I've picked up some Persian from my parents and some Spanish from being in Southern California, as I'm sure many people of that region have done the same. So, but the two fluent languages that I speak are Armenian and English.
Okay, very cool. With Persian, do you feel, or from what you've picked up from your parents and what you've heard, do you pick up any similarities between Armenian and Persian?
There are some similarities. There's a lot of words that are borrowed. And so, and in that region and as a whole, because I think Persian has a lot of root words that are used in other languages too. So, yes, there are similarities. And as I'm sure we'll get into later, the because my family is from Iran, our dialect is peppered with Persian words.
I think that's really cool. As far as Armenian language as it goes, and you spoke, you speak Armenian, then you moved to the States, and you're in Southern California, or I don't know where in California.
Yes.
Southern California, and I know there's a sizable Armenian population there. What do you notice about the language and how it changes from, I guess, where Armenian is spoken in Armenia and in Iran, and how it's spoken in the U.S. and California?
That's a great question. As I'm sure you know better than I do, language is changing all the time, right? And that's true for anybody who speaks any language. And I think obviously the environment really impacts how you speak. It changes how you speak. And so, yes, Los Angeles does have a very large Armenian community. I believe it is the second largest in the world. And so it's fascinating to me because it's unique in that this community here in Los Angeles has elements of Armenian dialects from all over the world. So sometimes you'll go places and people will be mostly speaking one type of Armenian dialect, but because LA has been such a place where Armenians from all over the world, due to various world circumstances, have settled, you tend to hear all dialects together. You tend to hear people who mix English words with Armenian. You tend to hear Arabic with Armenian, Greek with Armenian, Persian with Armenian, and so it's very interesting because, for example, me, I grew up in a household that spoke Armenian that had some Persian words incorporated in there, but I also know other dialects of Armenian. It's so familiar to my ear, and so if you asked me, I could get by on speaking it a little, but for sure I completely understand it. I know some of the Arabic words that are used by other people who speak other dialects of Armenian. People from the Republic of Armenia mix Russian words into their language because of their long-standing relationship with, 70 plus years as part of the Soviet Union. And so Los Angeles is very unique because it's given us all an opportunity to get to know each other again. And one of the ways that we have done that is through our language. So all those dialects, having grown up in LA, are very familiar to my ear and don't feel foreign or different to me, as they might if someone grew up, like if I grew up in Iran and I went somewhere where they were speaking another dialect of Armenian, that would be very drastic for me. But because I've been in a situation where it's been diverse internally, I've had a chance to kind of dip in and out of all the different dialects and ways people speak.
Oh, wow. The dialects, how similar are we talking? The ones that you're familiar with, like, is it a matter of just like, a letter changing here or there, or is it like just
sometimes? Okay, so sometimes it's a letter. So for example, there are words that I would use a B for that someone who speaks Western Armenian would use a P for. But then there are also, actual words in which are very exclusively used in Western Armenian that people who speak Eastern Armenian are not that familiar with. It just really depends on your level of education and how familiar you are with the language. So in terms of dialects, if we wanted to keep it very simple, there's Eastern, which is what I speak, and then Western Armenian, which is actually an endangered language. There's less and less people who speak it.
Oh no.
But if you want to dig a bit deeper and get a bit more complex, so I speak one dialect of Eastern Armenian, whereas someone from the Republic of Armenia speaks another dialect of Eastern Armenian. And then there's dozens or so dialects in Western Armenian that are very particular to the cities that people come from, that people were indigenous to at one point. And a lot of those have been dying out, just like other languages. If
Yeah.
people don't speak them, sometimes you hear about Native American languages that only there's a couple speakers left. I have to say that there are efforts to try to preserve it, but it is definitely a pressing issue in the Armenian community that many people are becoming more aware of, for
Hmm.
sure.
Are you aware of any efforts made to revitalize this Western dialect and people consciously using it to push it forward for the next generation?
There are, yes. So I know that there are some opportunities for people to virtually learn the language, which is wonderful because you have a lot of people, second or third generation Armenian Americans who, for one reason or another, did not have the opportunity to fully absorb the language of their ancestors. And now they are being given opportunities through virtual learning to be able to uh, learn it again, which is very exciting. And those components are both writing and speaking.
Hmm.
And there are lots of, books being published, some children's books being published that concentrate on Western Armenian. And so, yes, definitely there is an effort. And I think people have really recognized that, if we don't do something about this now, that this could be a situation where maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, there will be less and less speakers. And then, it'll just become like a dead language.
I knew that there were those two basic Eastern Western dialects of Armenian, but I didn't know there were dialects within those. And I didn't know about Western Armenian, being endangered at all. So I totally support those revitalization efforts and, people doing what they can for future generations to hold on to this language. It's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't speak Western Armenian as my native dialect, but it does not matter because to me, it's such an important part of our culture. And so it needs to be preserved and it needs to be kept. And also, we were talking about earlier, language changes. And so there have to be new ways of communicating so that younger generations can grasp it and see the importance of it too. So, yeah, lots of efforts being made, but for sure a pressing issue.
100%. Totally agree. I would love to know about, and you don't have to get too super personal. I don't want to, I don't want you to talk about anything you don't feel comfortable talking about, but coming to the US and, I'm, I don't know, but I'm going to assume that like when you came here, when your family was here, you were immersed within Armenian community in the US.
I was immersed in my home
Okay.
of Armenianness, definitely. Yes, so LA does have, like we talked about before, the largest percentage of Armenians, one of the largest percentages of Armenians outside of the Republic of Armenia.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it also has a very large percentage of Iranians too, who came here just like my family did, either after the Iranian Revolution or during the Iran-Iraq War. And so, yes, Southern California has become like a beacon or a haven
Right.
for all of us. My Armenianness, whether it was language or culture or otherwise, was mostly contained within my home and the homes of my relatives.
Okay.
And so we all came together
Mm-hmm.
within several years of each other. And so, when you come to a country, very, very unfamiliar and strange country, no matter where you go, right? That's a feeling you have. You tend to stick together more. And so my childhood and what I saw of my Armenianness was expressed in all the time and weekends spent at my grandmother's house or my uncle's house,
Mm-hmm.
or people coming over to my parents' house. And that's how I experienced the language and how I experienced my culture. And
Mm-hmm.
then of course there were occasional times when we would go to church one year for Easter or for baptism, and that was another expression of it. And then it got more complicated for me because at some point when I was like 13, I was a public school kid. And then when I was 12 or 13, I switched over to Armenian school full time. So we're talking
Wow.
like full curriculum of, you know, everything that you would learn in a public school, but plus Armenian language lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an incredibly difficult transition for me
Mm.
because even though my parents had made an effort, we spoke Armenian at home, I could speak Armenian, and I had gotten some lessons to write and read. That was a more formal education. And so it was a very difficult learning curve being able to get up to the point where all these other students were. And I remember nights like one after the other of my parents practicing with me just to
Mm.
supplement my language skills so I could get to the level of what all of these other kids were at. It was a very difficult transition,
Yeah,
but
I bet.
yeah, so it was.
Well, the reason why I was asking that question is because, I'm not familiar with the immigrant experience myself personally, but I'm always curious about what people went through and what that experience is actually like. And, knowing that there is such a community here of not only Iranians, but also Armenians in Southern California. I just wonder what kind of community building there was and what kind of, like welcoming there was for people who were, like you said, your family all came together. And I'm sure hundreds, dozens of families came here together. And just what kind of, if you were aware, or if you've heard any stories of, I just wonder what that experience was like. And, you did say that you went to Armenian school when you were a little bit older. And then, you were with other kids who also spoke the same language and presumably went through the similar experiences that you did. So I just wonder, like, what was it like being a kid and like having, all your friends or your schoolmates and, they're all speaking this language and they're all, I guess to various extents, either outside in the world in this Armenian community or in this Iranian community, or at home with their family and their extended family. I'm really just curious, like, what did that feel like?
It's a complicated question or a complicated answer, especially because when you come here and your family life is very much different from the outside world. And so as a child or as an adolescent, you're having to navigate multiple worlds at the same time. And so, and you recognize that. You recognize that what you do at home or what is spoken about and how things are spoken about at home are very different from this outside world that you find yourself in. And you make those distinctions. It was my personal experience was actually even more complicated, I guess, because I went to public school my whole life. And so up until that point, school was never a place I associated with the other part of my identity, my Armenian identity, they did not intersect with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got to Armenian school, it was very much like a reverse culture shock for me because all of a sudden, yeah, you have a group of like 30 classmates that all speak Armenian and some form of Armenian, and we're all expected to communicate. And it's a bit daunting actually because, like I was saying before, my Armenianness in the way that I spoke and how I expressed myself was very much contained in my household and with my own family. And so it just kind of opened up this other world of having conversations in classrooms learning our own history in Armenian, having to recite that history in Armenian, learning grammar, um, you know, having teachers who were exclusively speaking to you in Armenian and having to read in it and read in front of a class. It was a very difficult transition for me, but I have to say that having that experience really set the base for me to where I am now. So now I have the ability to read Armenian. Uh, I can write Armenian. I listen to Armenian news, and so if it hadn't been for that foundation, if you don't use a language, there's no use. You forget
Right.
it, right?
Yeah.
So that really set the foundation for me. At the time, like I'm saying, it was traumatic for me, but as an adult, when I reflect back, I think what a privilege, what a beautiful experience to have been able to have a opportunity to do that, and to all the people who came before me who set that up to concentrate on that. You were asking, LA is such a hub, and what was the community like? The Armenian history of Los Angeles is very layered, and it's in waves, and so you have about 100 years of history there, and every group that came has contributed in a different way, from different places in the world and because of certain world events. And so, yes, the people who came who, had the foresight to think, well, we should make a Armenian school, or make opportunities for children to learn Armenian. That set the tone for my life, and it wasn't until I was older that I realized how beneficial that had been for me.
Yeah. I've said on previous episodes how much I really love that when people come to the US for whatever reason from their homeland, I really think that it's so precious when they're able to hold on to their culture, their language, and make it a part of their community and community building, and especially making that effort for children and their children's children. And I just think that it's really easy to get lost in the US and just have this kind of, I think that's an understatement, but, to have this like quote, like, be American, whatever that means. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. And I'm sure there are millions of other people who can't really define it. So I think that, being able to hold on to your heritage and your language and your customs and your food, it's like, it's really wonderful. It's really, I think, just personally, I just think it's wonderful to see that.
I agree. And it takes a lot of effort. You have to really, really try, because, again, like you said, this is a place where you could get lost very easily. And there have been generations of Armenians who came, before my family did ever, for one reason or another, one of them being that they didn't want to be discriminated against, really kind of dropped their Armenian language skills, and they didn't really make an effort to teach their kids through no fault of their own, but because the environment kind of required that of them. They wanted their kids to get ahead. They did not want to be discriminated against or held back. And so they said, we've come to America. We're wiping kind of the slate clean. You're American now. And so go and, be that so that you can prosper. So no blame or shame about that at all. But, we are making efforts to kind of create newer opportunities for people who didn't have that to relearn it.
They had to survive so that we could be here. And now it's like our turn to,
Yeah, absolutely. Their time reflected what they went through. They didn't have those choices, but we can make efforts to go in different paths,
right?
Because of, so
yeah. I want to talk a bit about your dialect, since I do this all the time. I get so like into the culture and like the nuance and stuff, and I forget this is a language podcast sometimes. Let's say if you're out and about and you're hearing someone and they are speaking Armenian, is there something that someone could say who speaks your dialect that you would know automatically in your ear, like this person is from the same region that your family's from?
Yeah, it's mostly about just the accent.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about the accent. I can recognize it immediately. It's just the tone and the uh, melody of the way that they talk that I can absolutely kind of say, oh yes, this person is Iranian-Armenian, and talking to them would be like talking to my parents or my relatives. But then there's other ones, right? First of all, when you're not in LA and you're in other parts of the US or in Europe, I can't tell you how exciting it is to hear someone on the street, your ear kind of just travels to them speaking Armenian. So just hearing it, no matter what dialect it is in, when you're outside of the major pockets of where we are, is exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I think it's really mostly in the accent. I don't think it's anything specific that they would say, but just how they would speak.
Okay.
And it hasn't happened that often, to be honest with you.
Oh.
Outside of Los Angeles.
Is there an example of like how this particular accent sounds, or?
Yeah, so Iranian-Armenians are often accused of singing when they speak sometimes. And so, we speak more melodically than other Armenians do. And so you would hear when someone speaks that they would kind of stretch out the words a little more. Or speak in a more like rhyme rhythm tone type of thing. And so that's how I would know.
Okay.
That's really how I would know. Yeah.
I have a soft space in my heart for Singsongy accents. I just
Are there others that you like?
I think that, a lot of times people tease like Swedish people of having that like sing-songy accent, and I'm not too familiar with Swedish compared to maybe Danish or Norwegian, and people say that Swedes are more melodic. There are some, I think Portuguese kind of sounds a little bit like that. Brazilian Portuguese is a little it's like riding on a wave, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very
I love that. Yeah, yes, of all the Armenian dialects, this is the one that you could categorize as riding on a wave. The others are a little more cut and dry. I mean, those two when you hear them, but yes, Iranian-Armenians are very, they speak more like riding a wave. It's just like how you describe.
Learn a language, make a friend, change a life. Did you know that you can learn Eastern and Western Armenian at Natakellam with one of their native tutors from displaced backgrounds? If Armenian's not your thing, choose from Arabic, English, French, Kurdish, Persian, Spanish, Ukrainian, or Russian. Sign up today to learn to speak like a native with Natakellam's tutors from displaced backgrounds. Speaking Tongues listeners get a special 10% off on all languages with the code SPEAKING10 at natakellam.com. Natakellam, learn a language, make a friend, change a life. I enjoy that very much. What do you think for you, in your opinion, what do you think is really special, or what do you think is maybe not the most special thing, but a special thing that catches your attention when it comes to the Armenian language?
For me, personally, the most special thing about the Armenian language is just how diverse it is. That really is something that I think about often, that I love that we have these dialects. I love that I can understand many of them. I love that I'm still learning about some of them. The language really roots us and speaks to where we are from. And as a community that has gone through horrific events that kind of have severed us from those physical places, the language is one way in which we can reconnect with our roots and discover where we're from and also discover each other. I think really that's what's really special for me when I speak to somebody who is from a Western Armenian background. I love hearing them talk because it's so different from me. When I speak to somebody who is from the Republic of Armenia, I love that too. I hear new words all the time, and I just enrich my vocabulary, enrich my understanding of what the Armenian identity is and where we are in the world. I just think it's very exciting to be able to access so much through just a base language. So
Yeah.
that's what I would
Yeah.
say.
That's great. And I've taken a look at the Armenian alphabet, and I think it's so pretty.
It's pretty.
It's
Yeah.
so pretty.
I will admit it is very pretty. Yeah.
Is the Western Armenian, do they have a different alphabet than Eastern Armenian?
No, the alphabet is the same.
Okay.
It's just about how we're using it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very similar. So someone who's Eastern Armenian will sound the letter differently than someone from another dialect.
Okay.
So that's all it is. But yeah, it's complicated to learn too. Like we have so many letters. I think there's like 38 letters, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Lots of sounds that you can't say in English. The way that your tongue has to roll to make a sound is very sometimes difficult for native English speakers to be able to repeat, but yeah. And some of our words are very long, like the word for thank you, for example. If I say it now, it's Shnora Galuchun. So it's very long and complicated. And so sometimes even we say merci, which is like the universal word for thank
How
you.
did that happen?
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. It's really weird. I mean, the word itself is actually really pretty, Shnora Galutun.
Yeah.
But sometimes maybe it's just too formal or too long to say. And some of us will kind of resort to merci instead of Shnora Galutun. So.
How interesting. I wonder why merci and not like gracias or like shukran or something.
The French influence, like another word in French that has been borrowed into our Armenian, or I think generally in the Middle East, is cravat, which is tie.
A necktie, yeah.
The necktie, yes. And so we will say that sometimes instead of the actual Armenian word. So yeah, it's really interesting, all of these borrow words.
I'd love to know in California when, how were people in the community, how were they able to stay connected to their Armenianness, to their Iranianness? Was it through mostly, like you mentioned church? Was it through worship? Was there like a, like we used to have these, what they call like social clubs where, like right. The adults would go and like play cards and maybe have like a spring dance or something like that? Or was it staying in touch with people back home? Was it, what were some of the common expressions that you noticed of people who were, bringing their culture with them and sharing it with others?
Yeah, I think it was several things. I think it obviously helped that both of those groups, Iranians and Armenians, came in quantities that made it possible to kind of keep that community feeling still. They weren't isolated by any means. There was just so many of us that it was just a larger community. Church obviously for Armenians has played a big role in our history. And so that was one way, but I think there were other ways too. Certainly, I think back in the day, there were these social clubs that you're speaking of. Absolutely. And then there were, the way that I kind of experienced it, or my perspective on it, was through the different businesses that people would set up that I would go to with my mom, like grocery stores and, stores that you could buy homeware from, and uh, flower stores and things like that. And so they were Armenian owned, and they were mostly concentrated in one area, which is Glendale, California, and surrounding cities in the greater Los Angeles area. And so it was kind of like a mini village in a sense. And that's how I think the language was able to mostly stay and also change, because we were using it in our daily life. It wasn't just, going to school and learning it there. You were using it to communicate on the street. And that is extremely important, obviously, for you to keep your language going. That was how I experienced it whenever I did outside of my family home. So it was through these businesses, and my mom taking me on the weekend to like the butchers and having to interact with the people in there and listening to her speak to order things, just practical things like that, I think really affected me. But yes, there was church, and then there were social clubs, and then businesses, and that I think gave people an opportunity to kind of interact with each other in more than one place. And now if you go to Glendale, and even back then, you see signs in Armenian, business signs that are in English and in Armenian. And so that signals that there's a lot of people there who speak both languages, who only speak one. And so it's kind of really cool to see that writing on a billboard.
Yeah.
And be able to read it. That's the other aspect of it for me. And kind of just absorb it. And it was a bunch of things for sure that came together to kind of that allowed us to continue that.
We're heading there anyway, so let's talk about food for sure. I know that you have Dining in Diaspora, your website, your writing. And for those people listening, Liana is a phenomenal writer about Armenian culture and food. How did you get started in just writing about food and sharing bits of your heritage through food in this way?
I think, like for many people, food has been a very significant part of how I explored who I was. And it kind of just came naturally. I think really what solidified it is being in the Midwest and spending some time in Detroit, Michigan, where experiencing that food culture there was a way for Armenians to connect to who they were and their identity on a level that I had not seen before. And the more I spent time with them, the more I realized just how important food was to telling stories and to exploring history and politics and providing context into why we are the way we are and why we do the things we do. Just like we're talking about language, I think of food as a language too, as a way that stories can be told. And so it felt like the most democratic language through which I could explore other things. So, my background is that I'm a journalist, and I love writing, and I love, telling that and exploring that context. And so I approached it like that. Of course, I love to cook too and eat, but I wanted it to be more than just about the consumption of the food, but what's behind the food. And that's really how it started. The more I dug, the more I realized that there were all these untold stories, mostly related to people and groups in the diaspora who had not only managed to use food, even if they didn't know it, to put their communities back together again after the genocide and all the traumatic events that happened, but also they had somehow contributed to American food culture too, in very interesting ways. And that combination is what made me keep going. I just continuously would find stories. And so that thread is what made me keep writing about it.
What did you discover? What did you learn about, Armenian contribution to American food? And, what were some things that you discovered through your journey and your writing that, you didn't know and you were excited, happy, elated to discover and to share with people?
Yeah, so there are a few stories that have been very exciting for me and meaningful for me. Among others, there is one story about the group of Armenian immigrants who started Almond Joy. They're responsible for that candy, which
What?
I think really is
Wow.
people are divided. Yeah, I don't know if people love or hate Almond Joy, but anyway, so they are the ones who created Mounds and Almond Joy.
Okay.
If you are from the California area, you will be familiar with rice-a-roni.
The San Francisco treat.
The San Francisco treat, exactly. That was based on an old Armenian recipe.
Really?
Really?
That's so cool. I had no idea.
I know, it's kind of hidden. It's a really interesting story too, how that whole thing came about. I think probably NPR has done a little story on it, but that's one. And then the one that I've been kind of following for a long time, and I hope to write about in a bigger capacity, is how Armenians actually were responsible for introducing yogurt to America. That thing that is like everywhere on our shelves, supermarket shelves now. They were the first to introduce it, the first to commercialize it. Other communities, of course, were eating it too. Immigrants of that region who knew the benefits and loved yogurt. But there was a company out on the East Coast called Colombo, and they were the first commercial production.
I remember yogurt. Colombo yogurt. I'm really dating myself right now. Yeah. Between rice-a-roni and Colombo yogurt, I'm like, oh God, everyone's gonna know I'm old.
I'm right there with you. Don't worry, we can be old together. But yeah, so they were the first, and so these little tidbit little stories of not only of Armenian food flourishing in the diaspora, but also contributing to this larger food culture. And of course, by no means were Armenians the only ones who did this. However, our story is very unknown.
Right.
People don't really, we're a minority within a minority. And so people don't really think of that. And that is what motivated me to continue, because I wanted to just continue discovering the stories and keep unearthing them. And it's like, it's a hit every time when I find something and I'm just so excited. I'm like, okay, this is so great. This is just not ending. So yeah, I'm probably going to be doing this for a while.
Yeah. I love this project. Let us know, for those of us listening, let us know where we can find it and where we can get in touch.
Sure. So you can find this project documenting the history of Armenian food in America at www.diningindiaspora.com. And with that same title, you can find me on Instagram at diningindiaspora. And I'm very findable on Instagram personally myself, or on my author website, which is just my full name, Lyanna-Agajanian.com.
Awesome. I will add links to those in the show notes for this episode so that people can find you right away.
Thank you so much.
I would love to know about some dishes in Armenian culture that have, or I know I'm saying Armenian culture, and that is a big umbrella, right? But some dishes maybe that you've encountered throughout the diaspora as people are cooking that have cultural significance, relevance, maybe some of the traditional dishes. And one question I always like to ask, what's the dish that like people argue over? Like the dish that's like, no, my mom makes the best, no, my auntie makes the best, or this restaurant makes the best, such and such. Like what are those kind of dishes?
There's a lot of those. No shortage of those. Yeah, in terms of dishes. So just like the language, you are going to get a different flavor and presentation of something depending on whose house you're in or who you ask. And so the food that's made in my house is going to be very different from someone who is from the Republic of Armenia, and those person's dishes will be very different from someone who has a Western Armenian background. Now, we all have elements of the table that we share, but there are these variations, which again make it more exciting for me, just the diversity. But yeah, I can take you through some of my favorite ones. So I have a really big sweet tooth. So they're mostly, the things that I love are sweet based or pastry based. There's halva, which several cultures have, but it's essentially this like flour, sugar, butter paste that for Armenians has a lot of significance because it is used during funeral rituals.
Oh.
I think because it's so sweet, it's given as a way to kind of temper the sadness. And this was something that, even though it was something that was used at funerals, my dad was really good at making it when I was little. I don't know why or how he learned to do this, but he would occasionally make it for us, and it was just the tastiest treat. I mean, you can't go wrong, like flour, sugar, butter. So, and lots of stirring on the stovetop. And so that's one dish that I very much love that has a ritual with it that I've previously written about as a way of it kind of solidifying my family's presence in the US, because once you bury someone where you are, you become part of that place in some way.
Right.
And so I wrote an essay about how that was significant for me through that. Other things, there is a delicious Easter bread that is made by many Western Armenian communities, but also has, because of the internet and all of us kind of getting more familiar with each other, has been adopted more widely in Armenian circles. It is a braided and yeast bread that has a specific spice in it, or I guess it's a spice called mahlab, which is like the pit of a specific cherry tree, the St. Lucie cherry tree. And so it has this like very aromatic and fragrant taste.
Ooh.
It's very good. It's made during Easter.
Okay.
And a couple other cultures make it too. Greeks make it as well. And so that's a very significant one for me. Other things that you would find on an Armenian table have kind of permeated American food culture already. So dolma, if you go to Whole Foods or something like that, you will find wrapped grape leaves. Every family and community has a different way of doing it. They will put certain ingredients in it that others don't. They season it differently. Some people put a lot of lemon, some people don't put as much lemon. So it just really depends. I think that's where you see all the variations when you start to nitpick. And what else is there? Of course, there's the braided cheese we have that you can also find in supermarkets now, Armenian string cheese. It's also braided. Again, Whole Foods has it, but other places do as well. And there's a variety of stuff. I mean, in terms of what you asked me, what do people fight about? I can't think of one thing that we don't fight about of whose mom makes it better. Honestly, I mean, I've been at events where it's been like a buffet and it's just, the food hasn't played that much of a role in the topic of why people are there. And still people will walk up and be like, are you sure that that's how you're supposed to do it? My family makes it like this. We use red sauce. We use the white sauce. Like, it's just like, no matter where you are, you're always going to hear like a argument to and for these types of things. And I imagine that is reflected in other cultures too. Of course, we fight over food. It's very common, and so there's a lot of other things. Of course, another accessible thing that has permeated LA Armenian culture is Armenian kebab. How the way that it's seasoned, and there's a lot of places in Glendale, in particular, that you can go and taste that. Yogurt, of course, we talked about earlier. Always, you can find it on the table, and some people even make it themselves. And one other thing that I've written about is a green bean dish, which many cultures, again, have a green bean dish in their background. And that is eaten with lots of pepper and tomato sauce, and yogurt is put on that, and that's really, really good. We do have a lot of soups as well, made with things like lentils and chickpeas and variations of things. I mean, even for me, every time that I'm opening a old cookbook or talking to someone in the community, whether they're in Detroit or in LA or New York, I'm learning something new all the time, new methods of doing things and new dishes. So it's been very fun for me to kind of discover where I come from, who I am. I always feel like I have one foot in and one foot out. And so it's been a learning process for me as well.
What are some of the names of these dishes? And I guess, with Armenian being spoken in different dialects, like, do the names change of the dishes or?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
The names change. Yeah. So sometimes, again, if we talk about why things are called certain things, we have to go back and understand the history of how that happened, right? There are a lot of names that Armenians have for dishes that are shared in the Turkish language or in Arabic or maybe even sometimes in Persian. And it's not that they're necessarily owned by one culture or the other. It's just that because that was the dominant language of the time, and that's what was used to name dishes and ingredients. And we now, some of us put the Armenian words next to the others to kind of, have a balance of that. But there are a lot of people who call it something, call the dish whatever they're cooking in a language that's not Armenian. But again, that's just because of the history. You have to go back and delve into, dominant languages of the era and what people called things. I can name off a bunch of dishes, I suppose, but they will be things that, like I said, dolma, for example, that is a common word that is referred to like a group of wrapped grape leaves. Halva, the flour, sugar, butter dish. Halva is a common word that is used from everyone in Iran to India to Greece to everywhere around there. So you're going to find it in Arabic, of course. It's their like common names. You start to get to the Armenian names when you start looking in like older cookbooks, and they tend to have names that are in Armenian, but they're not complicated names. They're like very peasant-y kind of dishes. And so they don't really have these sophisticated or complicated names. They just are what they are. They do what they say, like the green bean dish, for example, we call that gananch fasulya, which literally means green beans. So it's not really, there's no like fancy names because a lot of these dishes are very much simple ingredients, village-based kind of food, but they are extremely comforting. And so, yeah, you get variations depending on what cookbook you open and how you categorize that food as well. So,
okay. You mentioned the Easter bread before, and that's, would you say like a typical like Easter, that's a typical Easter thing?
Yes, in Western Armenian households, that is essential on the table.
Okay. What about Christmas? What essential dishes do we have at Christmas time?
Oh, Christmas is fun. Okay, so again, sweet tooth. I will, I will describe. So one dish that is very significant during the Christmas season, which, by the way, many Armenians celebrate their Christmas on January 5th and
Hmm.
6th instead of December 25th. One dish we have related to that is something called anush abur, which, if I translate that, it means literally sweet soup. And that has a
Mm.
very interesting biblical story behind it. It is related to Noah. And Noah, as many of us have come to know, had an ark, and that ark landed on a mountain, and the mountain that he has allegedly landed on is very significant to Armenians. It's Mount Ararat.
Mm.
And so the story goes that Noah was running out of food, and he took bits of whatever he had left and combined them in a big pot and made a dish that way. And so this dish that we make for Christmas and or New Year has a version of wheat in it, like barley, and then there's like raisins and almonds in it, and some people even put rose water in it, and it's just mixed like a very comforting porridge and
Mm.
poured in a big bowl, and then on top of it uh, there's decorations. So we decorate it with pomegranates and apricots, and some people even write the year, of the new year. They'll write on that. So that's one dish that is very particular to Armenians that is on the table
Hmm.
during Christmas. I'm sorry, all my dishes have been sweet. That's what I gravitate towards.
No, it's fine. You like what you like.
Yeah.
That's normal. Thank you so much for joining me and talking about Armenian heritage.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. I like to end each episode with the same question, just to end on a fun note. Do you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Armenian to share?
Oh, this is a great question. There are many, but the two that kind of stick out in my head, I will describe them to you now. So the first one, if I say it in Armenian, it's "Gluchus geharsukas," which literally translates to "You're ironing my head," and that means you're just talking too much. You're giving me a headache. You are ironing my head.
I need that one.
Yeah, it comes in handy. It's a daily thing.
Yeah.
So that's a really fun one that I feel like my mom said to me many times when I was a kid, because I was a very chatty child. Um, and the second one is a more meaningful one that Armenians say when someone gets married. They say "Mek bartzi v'ra zeranak," which means "May you grow old on one pillow."
Oh, wow. That's
So
beautiful.
it's a nice thing, although very unpractical because I need my own pillow. But I like the sentiment behind it. I really like it. It's beautiful. So when someone gets married, you'll generally see people wishing them congratulations, but also "Meg bartzi v'ra zeranak," may you grow old on one pillow.
I really like that. And I'll admit I overthought it because I thought what the way you explained it makes more sense, but what I thought was that you grow old in the same bed with the same person and not move on to another pillow in
That's
someone
what it,
else's
yeah,
bed
no,
with
you got it. It's right. It's
okay.
just I'm taking it literally and thinking,
Okay.
I don't want to have one
Like
pillow.
one long pillow, yeah.
No, that is correct. That's the sentiment. The sentiment is
Okay.
may you stay together, may you have a fruitful life, may you have a strong partnership
Mm.
and have all the good things together forever in a marriage. Absolutely. My head just goes straight to, I need to have that other pillow. So.
Would you mind teaching me one of those, your choice, one of those phrases?
Sure. Which one do you like more?
Let's do the first one because I feel like I might need that at some point.
So the first word is galuchas.
Galuchas.
Mm-hmm. Hartukas.
Hartukas.
So you're ironing my head. So head is galuch.
Galuch.
Mm-hmm. Or if you speak to someone who's Western Armenian, they'll say kaluch.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Galuchas.
Galuchas.
Gahartukes.
Gahartukes.
Perfect.
Galukas, gahartukes.
Perfect. You got it.
Okay. I'll keep practicing that because that'll come in handy.
Yeah. I mean, you could just say you're like the British have a phrase too where they say you're doing my head in. It's kind of like the same sentiment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a lot of actually Armenian idioms and expressions and proverbs. If you just search online, you'll find them. And my friend, Nancy Krikorian, who's a wonderful novelist, she, on her Twitter account, puts a new proverb in Armenian and English every day.
Oh, wow.
She shares it. And so it's a lot of fun to wake up and read them sometimes.
Yeah. I'm going to follow her on Twitter.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again. And before I let you go, really quickly, in Armenian, after you've been talking to someone for quite some time and having a wonderful conversation, what would be the best way to say goodbye?
I guess the best way to say goodbye is Tdesuchun. Tdesuchun.
Goodbye. Thank you, Liana. And I will be talking to you soon.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.